Picture this, the moment after your death. Not a tunnel of light, not a choir, a road that climbs, and a figure standing across it where the road narrows to a gate. It does not weep for you, it does not welcome you. It asks you one question, and the question is a name. Give the right name and the gate opens, and you climb to the next one. Give the wrong name, or no name at all, and the figure turns you around and you fall. Back down the road, back through the air, back into a body, into a cradle, into another life that begins with the same forgetting as the last, and the gate closes behind you as if you had never reached it. This is not a horror story. This is, according to a group of early Christians we now call the Gnostics, the actual architecture of the afterlife. Not one judgment before one God. A gauntlet. 7 checkpoints between your soul and the light, each one manned by a warden who exists for a single purpose, to stop you from getting through. And the way past each warden was never your good behavior. It was never how kind you had been or how faithful. It was a password, a secret name you had to learn while you were still alive and carry through the gate of death in your memory, like a traveler crossing a hostile border with the right word ready on the tongue. Now hold that picture in your mind. 7 gates, 7 gatekeepers, a password demanded at each, because here is the detail that stopped me cold. The Gnostics did not invent it. 2,000 years before a single Gnostic teacher in Alexandria ever described that climb, scribes in the Nile Valley had already carved the very same journey onto the walls of their tombs. 7 gates, a guardian at each, and the same impossible demand: name me correctly or you do not pass. We have spent this series learning how the Gnostics said the prison was built and how a soul might escape it. This time we go after the route itself, the map of the road out, the names, the gates, the order. And when you lay their map beside the one the Egyptians left in their tombs, the two do not merely rhyme. In places they line up gate for gate, guardian for guardian, name for name. 2 systems, 2 civilizations, thousands of years apart, and one question that should not have an answer. We'll come back to this. Did the Gnostics inherit this map from Egypt, quietly, in the one city where both worlds met? Or did 2 peoples, separated by an ocean of time, sit down to describe the road out of this world and draw the identical thing? And this is not one text making one wild claim. The gauntlet appears across the whole Gnostic library, in the Apocryphon of John, which names the rulers, in the first Apocalypse of James, where a teacher drills a student on exactly what to say to the powers who will stop him, in the Pistis Sophia and the books of Jeu, which record the names and the seals like a manual. And the Egyptian mirror is not folklore either. It is written chapter and verse in the Book of the Dead, the spells the Egyptians buried with their dead for the precise purpose of telling them what to say at each gate. Independent texts, independent traditions, one recurring structure. And what it describes is not a myth about the afterlife. It reads like a set of instructions for crossing it. For weeks now, we have been tracing one claim through text after text: that this world is not the home it pretends to be, that it is closer to a holding cell, and that there is a way out. Last time we went all the way back to the first garden and found the Gnostics' most forbidden reading waiting there, that the serpent was not the deceiver but the rescuer, that the voice which forbade the fruit was not the supreme God, but a lower, blind power they called Yaldabaoth, the demiurge, the maker of this world, and that the figure moving through the serpent, trying to wake the prisoners, wore the face of wisdom herself, Sophia. We ended on a single, quiet warning, that the cell door was never locked, but that a prison without a lock still has guards. This is where we meet them, because the demiurge never ruled alone. The same texts that named him also tell us he made others in his own image, rulers set over the world like wardens over a yard. And they tell us where those wardens are stationed, what they are called, and what a soul must do to get past them. So this time we are not looking at the prison. We are looking at the route out of it, gate by gate by gate. This is Weird World Files, where history meets the unexplained. Now, let's begin. Start with what kind of thing the afterlife actually is, in this map. Because the picture most of us inherited is a single doorway. You die, you stand before one judge, the verdict comes down, and that is the end of the journey. The Gnostic texts describe something completely different. Not a door, a staircase. And on every step, someone is waiting. The Apocryphon of John, the same text we drew on last time for the birth of the Demiurge, lays out the structure. Yaldabaoth, having mistaken himself for the only god, does what every insecure power does. He builds an administration. He surrounds himself with rulers made in his own likeness, and sets them over the cosmos in ranks. And the Gnostics had a word for the inner circle of them, the hebdomad, from the Greek for seven, the seven. 7 rulers. The texts call them Archons, from the Greek archon, a ruler, a magistrate, an officer of the state, not demons with pitchforks, officers, administrators of a world. And each of the 7 in the Gnostic cosmology is bolted to one of the 7 moving lights the ancients could see wheeling through the night sky, the 7 classical planets: Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, the Sun, Venus, Mercury, the Moon. 7 spheres, stacked one inside the next like the layers of an onion, the Earth at the dead center, and the realm of light somewhere far outside the outermost shell. And now you can see the shape of the problem. If the light is outside the 7th sphere, and your soul begins down here at the center, then escape is not a single leap. It is a climb. Out through the sphere of the moon, and past its ruler. Out through Mercury, and past its ruler. Through Venus, the Sun, Mars, Jupiter, and finally Saturn, the outermost gate, the last checkpoint before the open sky. 7 spheres, 7 rulers, 7 gates between a buried spark and the home it was stolen from. So who are they? The texts do name them, and here is where this channel has to be honest with you, because the names are exactly the kind of detail a lazy retelling smooths over. The lists do not perfectly agree. Different Gnostic schools, copying by hand across centuries and 1,000 miles, recorded the 7 slightly differently. But run the manuscripts side by side, and a recurring roster emerges. Yaldabaoth himself, often seated at the top at Saturn, and then names that will sound strange and yet half familiar, because many of them are twisted Hebrew names for God, broken apart and handed out to the Wardens. Yao, Sabaoth. Adonaios from Adonai, my Lord, Elohaios from Elohim, Astaphios, Horaios. Sit with that for a moment. The Gnostics took the holiest names of God in the Hebrew scriptures, the names spoken in the temple, the names too sacred to pronounce, and in their map, those are not the names of the Most High at all. They are the names of the prison guards, the titles of the 7 officers standing between you and the real light. To the Gnostic, when you prayed to those names, you were not praying past the Wardens, you were praying to them. And we are not relying only on the Gnostic's own account here. One of our best descriptions of the 7 comes from a man who hated them. Around the year 248, the Christian scholar Origen sat down to refute a pagan critic named Celsus, and in doing so he described a Gnostic sect, the Ophites, and a diagram they used, a map of the soul's ascent. And on that map were the 7 rulers, each with the face of an animal, a lion, a bull, a serpent, an eagle, a bear, a dog, an ass, 7 beasts guarding 7 gates, each with a name the soul was required to know. When your own enemies, writing to destroy you, preserve the same 7 gates and the same 7 names you described yourselves, that is not the signature of one crank with a strange idea. That is the signature of a teaching that was widespread, detailed, and taken seriously enough to be worth attacking. Now the question the whole of the Gnostic project turns on. If the road out is a climb past 7 hostile officers, each one trying to send you back down, how does anyone get through? And here is where the Gnostic answer becomes one of the strangest, most specific ideas in any religion. You do not get past the Wardens by being good. There is no weighing of your kindness, no tally of your sins, no plea for mercy. The Wardens do not care what kind of life you led. They are border guards, not judges. And a border guard does not want your life story. A border guard wants the password. This is the secret at the center of the word itself. Gnosis. We translate it knowledge, and we imagine something vague and lofty, enlightenment, inner peace, a warm sense of the divine. The texts mean something far more concrete and far more startling. Gnosis in this map includes the actual names, the passwords, the specific words you must say to each of the 7 as you rise to prove you belong above them and not below. Salvation, to a Gnostic of this school, was not only a feeling, it was information, a thing you could be taught and could fail to learn and could carry through death like a key sewn into the lining of a coat. And this is the answer to the thing so many people go looking for and never quite find. The 7 names, the 7 passwords for the 7 Archons. They are not a lost magic spell hidden in some uncatalogued scroll. They are in large part the names of the rulers themselves, Yahweh, Sabaoth, Adonaios and the rest, spoken back to each warden at his own gate, as proof that you know exactly what he is, and that you are climbing past him to something higher than he is. To name the guard in this system was to disarm him. And the texts do not leave it abstract, they give the procedure. In the first Apocalypse of James, a Nag Hammadi text, the teacher does something that reads less like a sermon and more like a rehearsal. He warns the student that after death, the powers will stop him on the road and challenge him, and then he drills him on precisely what to say. When they ask who you are, say this. When they ask where you come from, answer this. The student is being prepared, line by line, for an interrogation he will face on the far side of dying. The text even has a name for these stopping powers. Toll collectors, customs officers of the dead, demanding the correct declaration before they will lift the barrier. The Pistis Sophia and the books of Jeu go further still, recording names, seals and ciphers in dense, almost bureaucratic detail, the spiritual equivalent of a sealed travel document stamped for each checkpoint. The Gospel of Mary preserves a smaller, sharper version of the same scene, the soul rising, met by hostile powers, answering each one until it is free. And even Irenaeus, the heresy hunter we met last time, no friend of the Gnostics, describes certain teachers preparing the dying with set formulas to recite to the powers above, so the soul would pass through unseen and unhindered. He found the practice outrageous, but in condemning it, he confirmed it. So picture what this meant for an actual Gnostic, alive, walking around in the world, knowing they were going to die. The most important thing you could possibly possess was not a virtue. It was a memory. The names, in the right order, ready. Lose them, forget them, never learn them in the first place, and the climb fails at the first gate, and you are turned back down into another body, another forgetting, another whole life spent not even knowing there was a test. Hold them, and the gates open one after another, and you rise past every warden the demiurge ever set over you, and out. Ask yourself this. If that were true, if the way out were a set of words you had to learn before you died, then the single cruelest thing anyone could do to you would be to make sure you never heard them. Which is roughly where I expected this story to end, a vivid, strange, self-contained Gnostic idea sealed inside its own century. But here is what shouldn't be possible. This system, 7 gates, 7 guardians, a name demanded at each, has a twin. And the twin is not a rival sect, or a later imitation, or a borrowing from down the road. The twin predates the Gnostics by 20 centuries. It was already ancient when the first Gnostic teacher drew breath, and it was written down not in Alexandria but 500 miles up the river by the oldest death cult in human history. The Egyptians did not fear death the way we do. They feared something more specific. They feared getting it wrong. Because for them too, death was not a door, but a journey, a passage through a hidden landscape called the Duat, the underworld, towards a final field of peace they called the Field of Reeds. And that landscape was not empty. It was guarded, full of gates and halls and portals, each one sealed and watched. And the Egyptians believed the dead would be stopped at everyone and challenged, and that the only thing that would carry them through was knowing the names. This is why the Book of the Dead exists at all. We call it a book, but it was never a single volume. It was a collection of spells. The Egyptians called the work the Book of Coming Forth by day, copied onto papyrus and tucked into the wrappings of the dead, or painted directly onto the walls of the tomb. And a great many of those spells have exactly one purpose: to give the dead the right words to say at the gates. They are, quite literally, a traveller's phrase book for the border crossing of death. And now we come to the spell that stops me. In the standard numbering it is spell 144, and spell 144 describes a sequence of gates in the house of the underworld, 7 of them. 7 gates, and at each gate, the spell says, there stand 3 figures: a doorkeeper who holds the threshold, a watcher who guards it, and a herald who announces who may pass. 3 guardians at every gate, and the dead must know and speak the name of each. The name of the doorkeeper, the name of the watcher, the name of the herald, at all 7 gates in order, or they do not advance. Read that back against the Gnostic map and the hair stands up. 7 gates, a guardian, or a set of guardians, posted at each. And the same mechanism, exactly. Not judgment, not virtue, not mercy, but a name. The correct name, spoken at the correct gate, by a traveller who had to learn it before they died. The Egyptians even wrote the names into the spell, so the dead would have them ready, the same instinct that drove the Gnostics to record their passwords in the Pistis Sophia. Both cultures looked at the journey out of this life, saw a series of guarded gates, and reached for the identical solution. Memorize the names, carry them through. And it is not a single isolated spell. The 2 chapters that follow, 145 and 146, do the same thing again at greater length, describing the portals of the House of Osiris, one after another, each with its keeper, each demanding to be named. Gate after gate after gate, and at every one the same refrain: I know you, I know your name, let me pass. The Egyptian dead did not beg at the gates. They identified the gatekeeper, and to name a thing in Egyptian thought was to hold power over it. Stop and think about what that would actually mean. 2 systems for escaping the world. One carved into Egyptian tombs in the 2nd millennium before Christ, one written by Gnostic teachers in the 2nd century after, more than 2,000 years apart. And both of them describe the soul rising through a series of guarded gates, and both of them say the same thing about how you survive the crossing, that the dead must know the secret names of the guardians, or be turned back. That is not a vague resemblance. That is the same machine built twice. So how does that happen? There are really only 2 ways to explain it, and the rest of this investigation lives in the space between them. The first explanation is the sober one, and we should give it its full weight: influence, inheritance. Because there is one place on Earth where these 2 worlds did not just coexist but pressed directly against each other. A single city where Egyptian temple religion, Greek philosophy, Jewish scripture, and the new Christian movements all poured into the same streets. Alexandria. Alexandria, in the first centuries of our era, may have been the most concentrated meeting of traditions the ancient world ever produced. Founded by Greeks on the edge of Egypt, it held the greatest library on earth, a vast Jewish community, Egyptian priests still tending temples whose rituals were already thousands of years old, and the first generations of Christian thinkers all arguing in the same marketplaces. If you wanted a city where an old Egyptian map of the afterlife could seep into a new Gnostic one, you could not design a better laboratory than Alexandria. So the sober explanation is simply this. The Gnostics did not receive their 7 gates by revelation from beyond the world. They absorbed them from the Egyptian funerary religion that had been mapping guarded gates for 2,000 years, lying all around them in the temples and tombs of the country they lived in. The architecture was already there. The Gnostics gave it new names, wired it into their own story of Saphir and the Demiurge, and carried on. And honestly, that may be the answer. We owe it to you to say that plainly, because the channels that cover this material almost never do. There are real cracks in any clean, one-to-one story of Egypt simply handing the map to the Gnostics. For one, the 7-sphere climb, the soul rising through the planets past a ruler at each, is not actually Egyptian in origin. That part carries a different fingerprint. The idea of 7 planetary spheres and of the soul descending through them at birth and reascending at death comes most clearly from Babylon, from Chaldean astrology, the great Mesopotamian science of the 7 wandering stars. By the Gnostics' time, that planetary scheme had spread through the whole Hellenistic world. So the Gnostic gauntlet is almost certainly a braid of at least 2 older strands, a Babylonian sky of 7 spheres, and an Egyptian underworld of 7 named gates, twisted together into something new. And the match is not perfect. The Egyptian gates are not planets. The number 7 recurs, but the neighboring spells count their portals differently. Some passages list far more than 7. The guardians' names do not transfer across. This is not one document copied from another. Naming that honestly matters, because it is the difference between a pattern and a fantasy. We are not claiming the Gnostics photocopied the Book of the Dead. We are saying something more careful and stranger, that across Babylon, Egypt, and Gnostic Alexandria, 3 traditions, 3 languages, thousands of years, the same basic picture of the soul's escape keeps reassembling itself. Guarded gates, a required name, a test you must prepare for before you die. Which brings us back to the second explanation, the one the sober account cannot quite kill. Influence can explain how an image travels. It struggles to explain why this particular image felt true to people who had every reason to describe the afterlife however they pleased. The Egyptians were not copying anyone, they were among the first. The Babylonians were not copying anyone, and yet when each of these peoples, in their own language and their own age, sat down to describe what the soul meets after death, an unusual number of them did not describe a single judgment or a peaceful sleep. They described a climb, through levels, past guardians, requiring names. We'll come back to this, but ask yourself the obvious question. If you were simply inventing a comforting afterlife, is this what you would build? A border crossing, a bureaucracy of wardens, a test you can fail. It is a strange thing to imagine again and again by accident. Either the human mind, for reasons we do not understand, keeps reaching for the same image of gates and guardians whenever it stares into death, or, as the Gnostics themselves would insist, more than one people caught a real glimpse of the same real road and wrote down what little of it they could carry back. This investigation cannot close that question. No honest one can. And that tension is not a flaw in the story. It is the story. And here is the part that turns an ancient puzzle into something that might concern you directly. Because the blueprint did not stop in the ancient world. Listen to the accounts people give now, ordinary people, in our own time, who were declared clinically dead and then came back. A striking number of them do not describe a single white light and nothing else. They describe thresholds, a barrier they were not allowed to cross, a point at which they were met and questioned and turned back. Some describe a light that felt, underneath its warmth, like something they were not supposed to walk into. We spent an earlier investigation on exactly that. The warm light the Gnostics warned was a lure, the checkpoint at the edge of death where the soul is met and quietly returned. And what unsettles me is not any single one of these accounts. It is the shape they keep falling into, the Egyptians at their gates, the Gnostics at theirs, and now a stranger on an operating table, with no knowledge of either, reaching for the same handful of words. A boundary, a guardian, a sense of being tested at the threshold. I am not going to tell you what that means. I do not know what it means, and anyone who tells you they do with certainty is selling you something. But I will leave you with the question the Gnostics built their whole strange practice around. They believed the test was real, and that it came for everyone, and that the one thing which decided the outcome was whether you had learned the way through before you arrived. They believed most people reached the gates unprepared, not because they were wicked, but because no one had ever told them there were gates at all. Ask yourself this. If there were a test at the end of the road, and the only thing that mattered was knowing it was coming, would you rather be told or left to find the first gate on your own? Before we go, so the way out was always a test of names. 7 gates, 7 wardens, 7 secret words, written in Egypt, rewritten by the Gnostics. And then the Gnostics were hunted into silence, their gospels burned, their name erased. For 2,000 years we were told the last of them died in the sand. But here is the detail that stopped me cold. They didn't all die. In the marshlands of southern Iraq, the exact ground where Sumer first rose, a people still gather at the river's edge. They still baptize in running water. They still speak of the demiurge, the Archons, the light trapped in the dark. They never converted. They never forgot. They are the last living Gnostics on earth. And what they remember was never supposed to survive. Have you ever stood at the edge of running water and felt, without knowing why, that some part of you was being washed of something it could not name? This is Weird World Files, where history meets the unexplained. Next time, we meet the ones who never forgot.